All right, I wanted to talk about real quick just very basic stuff about inverse trig functions and what they mean essentially. So say for instance you're dealing with a function like y equals inverse sine of x. So that right there is written as, or is said as inverse sine of x. Now it's also sometimes written as this, arc sine of x, and that means the same thing. So these are just two different ways of writing the same thing. You know, that one's pronounced arc sine, this is inverse sine, but they mean the exact same thing. And it's a little confusing because that to the negative 1 power means, think it's like sine to the negative 1, but it's actually not. It means inverse sine because, you wouldn't write sine to the negative 1, you would just write cosecant. So and the same thing applies to inverse, cosine, inverse tangent, and all the other trig functions as well. And what this basically means is, so say for example, sine of pi over 4, okay, is equal to 1 over square root of 2, or square root of 2 over 2. You could rationalize it and write it the same way. So if that's the case, the relationship that inverse sine has is that then inverse sine of 1 over square root of 2 is equal to pi over 4. Okay? So, typically when you get a, sine function or any trig function, you put an angle in, and from that angle you get out, a value that represents a ratio of sides, basically, but you get a value, okay? So in this case, inside of an inverse sine is essentially like the answer to a trig problem, and you're trying to look for what angle would make that answer, okay? So, if I had just had given you this, inverse sine of 1 over square root of 2, you're trying to find what angle, if I put it into sine, gives me the result 1 over square root of 2. So it ends up being pi over 4 in that case, all right? Now, there are definitely limits on the domain and so forth, and the range of these functions. I'm not going to get into that too much. I just want you to see this basic idea right here. And so, hence the name inverse of it. One other thing that is helpful is in solving equations. So if you ever had something where you wanted to solve a trig function, you could use the idea that inverse sine and sine are inverses of one another. Since inverse functions have the property, remember, like for instance, f of g of x equals x, and same with g of f of x equals x. So that means for a trig function, that means that since inverse sine and sine are inverses of one another, you could do inverse sine of sine x, and they basically cancel each other out, kind of. They, inverse sines don't necessarily cancel each other out, but they basically do that. And so inverse sine of x is just equal to x, just whatever's inside right here. And same thing's true with sine of inverse sine of x. Okay? Those will kind of cancel out and just become x. So, some real basic stuff about inverse trig functions.